We are not Rotoscope today, but we are coming to you from our studio to talk about another Ralph Bakshi film, our second Ralph Bakshi film, I believe. We previously covered American Pop, which was Bakshi's look at American pop.
Right.
And now we're going to be talking about a film that, I don't know, seems a little bit in his fantasy realm, similar to Wizards, similar to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I already did my push-ups to get my muscles going.
Yeah,
so
we're looking great. We're looking strong.
I just need my axe.
We're ready to fight some glaciers. All right, Boom. I'm the hot Kyle Goethe from GoatFilmReviews.com.
And I'm the cold Necron, Nick from St. Paul Filmcast, right.
I gave you a setup to be cool,
Necron.
Okay?
Yeah, well, I'm wearing blue and cold anyways. Yes, thanks for watching, and thanks for finding us. And for our loyal fans, thank you for continuing to support the show. Hey, we have a Patreon. Yeah, check that out for some great content, great deals, and an opportunity to what movies we can review in the future with, of course, we'll give a shout-out. Both Kyle and I are members of the Minnesota Film Critics Alliance. Check out that webpage for critics' reviews as well as ours, and we're talking about an animation kind of semi-hit from 1983. Back when we loved bodybuilding muscles and He-Man and Conan Barbarian came out, of course you got another action flick with the same kind of content. It's Fire and Ice.
Yes. In the north, an evil queen, Juliana, and her son Necron use dark magic to send a destructive glacier southwards. As the remnants of the land flee south to the volcanic fire realm of King Geralt, his daughter Princess Tigra has been taken by Necron, and the only saving grace may be the young warrior Larn, the last survivor of a village destroyed by Necron's glaciers, hoping to save her.
So this is Ralph, and then Frank Frazetta.
Yes.
Now, if you didn't know Frank Frazetta, my God, you didn't live in the 80s. He was, if you went to the comic book store or anyway, his posters were all over the place. In fact, if you know, the Conan Barbarian posters and the Champions, if you didn't know, the poster for Vacation, that's very much a Frank Frazetta kind of a style poster.
Yeah.
Vacation of the heroic man, but he's just taking his kids on a vacation. That's why it's so funny. It's a parody of all those Frank Frazetta posters we see.
Yeah, you see that poster and like, if you know the name, it jumps to you, but at the very least, you know it's one of a type.
So he came up with this niche of just making these illustrations of these fantasy worlds before we even got Conan and Barbarian films. And then when these merged from the late 80s, he was everywhere. And then the heavy metal magazines. These characters are based on both Frank and Ralph's ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like they cultivated, similar to like 2001: A Space Odyssey, which seemed to be like a filmmaker and a storyteller kind of merging their idea together with that film. Kind of what happened here as well, but just taking on a more fantasy Fritz the Cat-like approach.
Exactly. And then we talked about American Pop, but if you're young and you're kind of don't know what rotoscoping is, kind of give the refreshing kind of the...
So basically, they get the actors, they shoot them in black and white using live action footage, and then it is, the term rotoscoping is then animating over the top of that. Yeah. Basically, like, this film did not specifically have a production designer, it had a costume design because they were going to have the people wearing stuff. And then you try to pick actors that are going to look the role, and you may not always get the same voice actors. Like in this case, there's a lot of voice actors who just did not play the roles because they didn't have
voices
a physique.
Or the voices did not match the person playing the role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Bakshi and Frazetta both talked about, like, for example, looking for Princess Tigra. They wanted a very voluptuous look to the character, and they said even the person that they ended up casting to play the physical role of the film, they ended up overestimating certain elements, I guess, of her carriage.
Exaggerating. In art, the word is exaggerating.
Yes.
Certain elements. So yeah, you rotoscope, you basically call in the live shots, so these are real actors doing the roles, but they're right. It's almost like you're just doing a green screen and painting over it.
Yeah.
Very accomplished, went on to be accomplished people, worked on, do the background layouts. Like Thomas Kincaid was, Thomas Kincaid was on.
Yeah,
the layouts.
The painter who made all those things that are in your grandmother's house on the wall, Thomas Kincaid, a man who I didn't think was controversial, but apparently within the art world, people did not like him. There was also James Gurney, who did background painting. He actually did all the paintings. If you were like a kid in the 90s, there was the Dinotopia series of books, which was a very, very popular dinosaurs living with humans series. Yep. You also had Peter Chung, who did the layout artist work on the film. He actually went on to work on Eon Flux, the very influential
animated, right?
MTV series.
From MTV, which is very late. It's almost like lanky. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very weird.
But then, of course, you also had two writers on the film, Roy Thomas and Gary Conway, who were like, if you read a comic book throughout that time period, they had created something that was in that comic book.
Or it had some kind of their fingerprints or DNAs from what they did before and then transferred for other people writing. Yes.
Yeah, so there was a lot of basically people who had come from greatness within this type of realm, and people who went on to greatness in this type of realm.
Yes.
A great springboard for all
For
of
some
them.
people, it was, this is a focal point, but also a springboard for others. So Fire and Ice, definitely a simplicity kind of a thing, but you understand when you get Ralph and Frank together, this is what's, it's almost like,
it's kind of like Lord of the Rings if there was no plot given after that prologue. Because I felt like the prologue of both those films sets up so much mythology so heavily, but like Lord of the Rings keeps putting plot in, and Fire Ice is like, nah, we got it now, we're good.
Right. Plot, we don't need it. Right. So it's not a lot of background to this because I don't think it was made quick.
Yeah, 20th Century Fox Studios, now 20th Century Studios, basically they jumped on board because of the financial success of Bakshi's other film, Wizards. And then there was that kind of idea of fantasy in 1982 was very, very lucrative.
Especially early 80s, because we had Conan.
Yep.
I mean,
there was the Beastmaster film that was quite a good hit as well. And then there was also that association of people who knew that Star Wars is essentially more fantasy than sci-fi. So like fantasy films were still hitting on a pretty good
Sword
realm
and Sorcerer. The Sword and Sorcerer stuff. And Dungeons and Dragons was emerging. So this whole thing of capitalizing on these fantasy quests of muscle bound guys and loincloths rescuing.
And I think there was the idea that Ralph Bakshi was going to deliver a finished film with the budget, because he worked in small budgets a lot throughout his career, and his ability to problem solve was always kind of notable.
Yes, and you always have a bad guy who has a throne.
Yep.
You always have to have a throne.
Yeah, I wish I had a throne. But then I'd have to be a bad guy.
Well, I'd like to say with Bakshi, there's not a lot of background. He doesn't reveal a lot for his process of making films, and not really is kind of really known about the making of them.
If you watch like some of the background stuff too, like his commentaries and his background videos on a lot of his films, it's interesting because they're more like just kind of like telling fun stories from the set than they are specifically like dealing in how did we make this work. One thing I was interested by, because so much of American pop is rooted in like the politics of the time periods that we're going through, and then he also infused a lot more political I guess imagery with things like his Lord of the Rings adaptation. They had, Sauron and the bad guys from there had Nazi-like, ideals, and then Wizards would do the same thing. So I was looking for that throughout the film. I was surprised that this one is pretty much a straightforward fantasy. I didn't see a lot more of the kind of the background imagery that you wowould see in his other fantasy films.
Perfect analogy. Now it's a perfect time after that to give us our review. Was there a story? I don't know.
There was 5 minutes of story.
Okay. It's one of the heavy criticisms Roger Ebert had with it. Where's the story? In this, I understand with Frank Frazetta and Ralph Bakshi, story is minus to what they want. They want an aesthetic. They want you to fall in love with these kind of things that you see on film. The environment, the bad guys, and the heroicism that you see. And story definitely takes up second place. I think after she has to rescue her the second time, everybody's like, oh, again.
Yeah. It's this kind of thing where it's Daphne from Scooby-Doo just keep getting kidnapped over and over again. We're like, sooner or later she's got to figure out a plan. I think the first 5 minutes of this film has more than enough mythology and story, and if it was spaced out more across the 81 minutes, because it's not a long film, you could have something, I think, quite impressive across it. But the thing is, I was so interested and taken with that mythology of the first 5 to 10 minutes of the film that when it starts going, it loses a lot of steam in the middle.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yep. I would agree that you take too much time on stuff that you don't have to.
Yep.
Where you get to the final battle, and it's not very long, you're like, okay, now it's over. Where it's be something that you wanted to see eventually.
Yeah, and it's one where, if you went back to the drawing board and hit a sequel, I think you would have like the ability to take some of the things that work and expound upon them. That's why I'm actually really interested in Robert Rodriguez's planned live-action remake of this film. He's been working on it for 13 years. I think if you're going to have someone remake this film, Robert Rodriguez actually could do that translation.
Because you need a punch like that. You need something to pop out of it, even though the look of it, and I enjoyed watching the look and the feel of it.
Yeah, it's an environment that is very welcoming to viewers. Like, it is very poppy in that kind of way. My favorite Bakshi film has always been Wizards, and I think compared to this film, Wizards has a lot of mythology and a lot of plotting in the first couple minutes. But then it also reveals things about its characters as it goes on. And I think that's where that film kind of rises above, is that film is consistently giving you information and events that are going to bring you in.
Yeah, one of the crucial elements, especially when you do sci-fi, fantasy kind of film, that your dialogue has to be a little bit exposition if you're not going to do a prologue. This one does have a prologue, long ago, of course.
Yeah.
But you have to give a little more explanation with your dialogue. It's kind of your forced hand. We try to not to do in writer workshop so much exposition and dialogue, but you kind of have to with a movie like this. And you don't, I mean, obviously you try to too much exposition. I would just want to seem natural. And you lose something. You lose an explanation, a little bit of it.
Yeah, because the story itself is very by the numbers. Yeah,
it's simple. Yeah. Necron's a bad guy. His mother's in charge. It's very much like Beowulf.
Yeah, they always have Necron as like a kind of name for the villain, where he's necrotitis. He's kind of decaying within front of you right there.
But the interesting, who you thought was being the glorious hero, this He-Man, Conan Barbarian kind of guy, is not the hero in the movie.
Yeah.
It's the other guy.
Yeah.
The axe-wielding guy, and I forget his name in the movie.
That's where the film actually feels most like Heavy Metal. Because, there was that whole sequence in Heavy Metal, which we talked about on the show previously, about, John Candy voicing this, loser kid who becomes this built He-Man kind of guy and goes to save the girl. That's kind of where the film feels right. And I think that's where I'm happiest with this story, is it feels like a Heavy Metal short that maybe shouldn't have been expanded, that maybe should have been a little bit tighter, part of an anthology of fantasy.
I agree, especially if you want to work with Frank and Ralph, who don't really care about the plotting. They like the look of it and by the aesthetics, and they're really concentrating on that. Hire somebody to make it like a 30-minute movie.
Yeah, because what you have here too, though, is
they're really punch in the beginning. You need a sci-fi that like that. Mm-hmm. Have a punch, have a battle, have a something.
Because you can accomplish quite a bit with the rotoscoping, because you can have the same people playing multiple roles, and you can film them from different angles and get that whole thing kind of working nicely. I do like the rotoscoping technique. I like when Bakshi uses it. I think he has a good handle on it. It's kind of like watching Italian horror, where you kind of have to understand what rotoscoping is to really enjoy it, because it does look a little clunky.
It does.
Whereas
when they don't blink.
Exactly. But when I showed my wife Suspiria for the first time, I told her hey, this is an Italian dubbed Tower of Babel kind of thing, where everyone's speaking their own language, and they're kind of using it on there. And I kind of warned her it does come off a little goofy if you don't get into it. And warning her about that really helped her embrace that film and enjoy it a lot more. That's kind of the same thing here, is you almost have to tell people the rotoscoping is an odd thing, but it works.
If you saw it on the menu and you clicked on it and you watch it, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
But if you understand who's making it and you understand where they're coming from, I think you appreciate it more.
Yeah, I rarely ever defend the idea of having to explain a film before you go in. I prefer going in blind, but this is definitely something where if you don't understand rotoscoping, it's not going to work for you as well. So I do think, tell your friends about the rotoscoping before you show them the movie.
Yeah, especially that understand that we were saturated with this kind of stuff, that you have your He-Man action figures coming out, but you also have this movie trying to battle. And I think it's one of those, when you get oversaturated things, people want to kick it out quickly, and you lose a lot of plotting, a lot of stuff that's necessary for sustainability, because you want to make the money that's hot now, get it out now, and you really sacrifice a little bit of story to get what everybody wants. They want this. They want the bad guy on the throne and everything, and they have long drapery, and the hero's got bustles and the axe and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's clearly cooks who didn't care to wait long enough for the souffle to be ready. They wanted to eat it right now and get it out. And I think that this movie could have cooked a little bit longer.
Yeah, but I understand, by 85, this would not be interesting.
That's the thing, too, yeah. And maybe that's because during the 1980s, we started to get that VHS-ness. We started to get that home video ownership, where films were going to have a longer lifespan. We talked in our previous episode about Psycho 2 that you'd seen Psycho 2 before you saw the original.
Yes,
because those home video things just were not coming around during the 80s and started picking up steam.
Especially with the older movies. It took a long time to get on VHS.
Exactly, yeah. And it's kind of like how we wait now we wait for 4Ks of all these old films to slowly get, petered out.
Yep.
that's kind of the case here, where if this film was even made 5 years later, during a heavier time of VHS usage, they might have thought more about the legacy and more about making sure that the film was kind of had that lasting impact.
Right. Definitely more to talk about it. This movie came out in 83. If they sat and a little stewed on it and marinated and it came out in 88, you would have a little more, less concentrated, making it better.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you could have embraced a little bit more of that insanity because the 80s really, as they died, really went off the rails in a spectacular way of trying to just
after
squeeze
like
everything in.
September 88.
Yeah, and so you could have really embraced the more gonzo approach to films that would have happened a few years later, and I think that would have given the film more of an impact too, because it does feel like a bit of a rote story, even though it has such a great mythology. Something that I actually think, I gotta feel like some of this had to have influenced elements of George R. R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire. Because the giant glacier kind of feels like the wall,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it does. The elements of Fire and Ice, and then George R. R. Martin.
And those subhumans kind of feel like White Walkers. Like there's parts of this whole narrative that I do feel like there's there's the whole element of what this film is that I think had to have had its influences.
Definitely.
So at least it's good in that way.
Yeah. Have you seen Fire and Ice?
Yes, it's streaming now on Amazon Prime if you haven't seen it.
I think it's on Tubi also.
Is it on Tubi? Oh.
Yeah.
So you got some options to check it out. And then come back here and leave your thoughts on the film if you haven't seen it. And maybe give us a recommendation on which is the Ralph Bakshi film that you would tell us to cover next. We already did American Pop.
Join the Patreon and tell me do Wizards. I want to do Wizards.
I just want to watch Wizards again so bad.
Yeah.
Make us do it. And thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
You can find all of my films, the hot and cold of it, over on goatfilmreviews.com.
What's so bad about cold? Why is cold always evil?
We're in Minnesota.
I know. I love cold.
To survive.
You can find, and when you're freezing, you can find my show, the St. Paul Filmcast, anywhere you find podcasts.